Hey, Texas Study students, this is Coach Science, welcoming you back to another one of our video lessons. Today's video lesson, we'll be going over chapter 14.3 and Civil War Effects on Texas. Now, the Civil War lasted between the years of 1861 and 1865. Now, although there were no major battles here in the state of Texas, the war had a serious and long-term impact on social and economic life in Texas. Now, one of the effects that happened here in the Civil War was the destruction of other very important southern towns. Now, here we see in this picture the ruins of the railroad depot in Charleston, South Carolina. Now, many areas of the South were in destruction like this, and many of the big towns led to the long-term impact on social and economic life in Texas because of how Texas was also in the South. Now, the first thing that we're going to look at was the Civil War casualties, as we can see here. There was 620,000 soldiers that died from combat, starvation, and disease during the Civil War, making it the bloodiest war in U.S. history. Now, as you can see here, 620,000. Now, but soldiers not only died as far as dying on the combat field. The other reasons where they were dying was because there was not enough food to get to each and every soldier, so they would die of starvation. Another thing is that they were not properly cared for during the war or as far as their wounds, so they would die of all these diseases that would infect them. So those were the three main culprits for this many casualties during the war. Now, here in this graph, you can see the casualties from each war that the United States has been in. Now, if you add almost all these wars up here, it would not be enough to calculate as many people that were casualties in the Civil War. So each war had enough casualties, right? They had a lot of casualties, a lot of lives lost, but obviously the most deadliest one here on U.S. and in the U.S. soil was the Civil War between the North and the South. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about was some Unionists here in Texas. Now, Unionists were people, those that are loyal to the Union, which was the North, and had a hard time here in Confederate Texas. Now, if you remember, a Unionist was somebody who was against slavery. Not like here in the South, right, because Texas was considered in the South, that was pro-slavery, that wanted slavery, okay? Now, because Texas was a Confederate state, those that were loyal to the Union had a hard time here in Confederate Texas. One of the things that they did was some of them left northwards and to fight for the Union. Now, what others did was instead of leaving Texas and fighting for the Union, they pretty much just they hid. They made sure that nobody could find them so they could avoid the Confederate draft that we talked about in 14.2. Now, although these people were loyal to the North, the people of Confederate Texas found these and thought of these people as traitors because although they lived in Texas, they felt that their beliefs aligned with those of the North and not with those of the South. So many Confederate people here in Texas considered them as traitors. Now let's switch our attention to how the economy was affected on this. Now, one of the Union's army's main goal was to take control here of the Mississippi River. Now, along with doing that, they would be able to split the Confederate army in half. One side over here on the east, one side on the west. Now, with that, Union victories along the Mississippi River closed all the land routes to other Confederate states. Now, as a result of the Union taking over the Mississippi River and splitting the Confederate Army, this splits the economy in two as well because this leaves Texas up in arms. As a result of this, Texas could no longer sell their cotton, and they decided to start doing other things. They decided to start growing food crops, which included wheat and corn. Since they couldn't sell their cotton to the North anymore, they decided that many people and many farmers decided that they should grow some wheat and some corn, in other words, to find a different way of making money. Now that they can no longer depend on the cash crop of cotton, they have to be able to depend on the food crop of wheat and corn. So this obviously starts to begin the decline downwards of the southern economy. Now, another reason why the economy started to tank and go down was, if you remember what we talked about in the last chapter, Abraham Lincoln and his Navy, had set up a blockade of all southern ports. Now, because the Union closed Texas ports, goods could not be shipped in or out. Now, as you can see here, here is a shipping yard where goods are brought in. As you can see here, they're taken down from this ship and put here and then sold to consumers, and then they're from things that need to go out are put back on the ship and then sent out, right? Now, because the blockade was set in place, right, there was a lot fewer goods. And because they had fewer goods, that means the prices would go up on these goods. That means if you want, for example, cotton, right, the cotton prices would have to go up because there was such a shortage of them. It's called supply and demand. Now, because the prices were so high on some of the things that many Texans were so used to having, they had to change their diets and find substitutes. And one of the substitutes which they had to adopt was involving the wheat and the corn in their diets. So because prices were way too high, they had to implement some of the own things that they were using into their diets and find substitutes for them. Now, many do not think so, but as many casualties and as many men involved in the Civil War, women had a huge role in the Civil War as well. Now, women, as you can see here, working right in the southern factories, and the northern factories as well. As many men went off to fight in the war, women had to fill the jobs in the farms, in stores, in ranches, and in factories, right? As you can see here, many women working in a northern factory to supply coal for an area, right? But as many men as that had gone off, these women need to work to provide a living for their homes. Now, if they had kids, back then there was a lot more families with bigger families, I should say. Sometimes they would have to leave their kids with a relative or a grandparent or a neighbor, or sometimes the eldest kid, the eldest son or daughter, would have to grow up very fast and essentially raise the rest of them while dad was at war and mom was working to provide for the family. Now, here's a fun fact for you. Did you know that about 250 women fought in the Confederate Army? That's right. They disguised themselves as men by cutting their hair short and wearing false mustaches. Now here you can see in this picture how this lady on the right cuts her hair short, gets a fake mustache, and even adds a goatee. Now women felt very strong about their southern beliefs, right? And that's why they would do this. They felt that they had a calling to defend what they thought was right at the time of this era, and they wanted to do whatever possible to be able to help the Confederate South. So this is what they did. 250 women signed up illegally, of course, because it was illegal at that time for women to join the army. So this is why they disguised themselves at this time. Now, during the Civil War, thousands of slaves were sent to Texas from other southern states. Now you're probably asking yourself, why would these people do this? Now the slaveholders wanted to keep them from running away to the north, where they were free, right? Or they didn't want them to be taken by the Union Army if any Union Army had already taken over that southern state. Now these slaveholders knew that if their state would be taken over, that these slaves would be emancipated because of Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. So that is why they sent them all the way to Texas, the farthest state in the Confederate Army, right? So what they were thinking is, we'll send them to Texas in the meantime. We'll let all the fighting happen over here, right? Once we win the war, we'll get them back to all our southern plantations and redistribute them so that they can go back to to work. But remember, unfortunately, and thankfully, that's not what happens. The North wins the war, and these slaves are emancipated and become free. Now, this concludes our video lesson on chapter 14.3 and the Civil War's effect on Texas. Remember to like my YouTube channel, Coach Science Altogether, and you subscribe. This is Coach Science signing out.